In this video, we are going to find out how to calculate missing values in similar figures. So I've got a couple of similar figures here and here. We'll get to these figures in a little while. Let's start with the two triangles. So the instructions say, find the values of x and y in each pair of similar figures. So we are told that these figures are similar. What that means is corresponding angles are congruent and corresponding sides have equal ratios. Let's jump into this one. So first things first, I notice that I need the measure of y degrees. Y degrees corresponds to this angle right here, which is 40. I know that because I've got 50 degrees down here, which clearly can't correspond to the 40 because they're different numbers. So this 50 would correspond with that one. This would correspond with the y. So what is y? It is 40 degrees. No calculation necessary. So y is 40 and that angle up top is 40 degrees. Now, moving a little bit further, how do we find that value of x? Well, as we noted in earlier videos, similar figures have corresponding sides that have equal ratios. What that means is, if I take the ratio of this side length right here to the corresponding side length of 10, which would be x over 10, then that ratio will be the same as the ratio between the smaller triangle's other side and the larger triangle's other side, which is 5 to 8. Notice that I started with the smaller triangle and went to the larger triangle in each ratio. Be careful not to flip those ratios, otherwise we're representing two different comparisons. You could have started larger triangle to smaller triangle and gone 10 to x and 8 to 5, and that would have been correct as well. Some people even correspond and do x to 5 and 10 to 8. I prefer doing one triangle to the other. With all that said, what we now have is a proportion. How do we solve that? Cross multiplication. So 8 times x is what I'm doing right here. So 8 times x is 8x. And then 5 times 10. 5 times 10, which is equal to 50. Okay, so from here, what we can do is solve. So I'm going to divide both sides by 8. And oh no, we're going to get a number that's a fraction. Is that okay? Sure, it's totally fine. 50/8, I'm just going to simplify right here. We can divide the numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor of 2, and that would get us 50 divided by 2 is 25, 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 25/4 is your answer. If your teacher needs it as a mixed number, that would be 6 and 1/4. There you have it. And that answer makes sense because 6 and 1/4 is slightly bigger than 5, as 10 was slightly bigger than 8. A little bit of reasoning there. Okay, let's go over a second example of how we can use our definition of similar figures and proportions to find missing angles and side lengths in similar figures. So, on to some rectangles. First thing I notice is that this angle and that angle correspond. Therefore, y is the same measure as the right angle, which is 90 degrees. So y is 90 degrees, or y is equal to 90. Next, I'm going to compare the corresponding pieces together. Typically, and what you saw I did in the last problem is, I take the variable and I start with that ratio, right? So I start with this, basically the shape that has the variable as the ratio that has the numerator. What I mean by that is, if I don't start with that, or why I do that, then I'll end up with x in the denominator, which isn't a big deal. So anyway, I go from the smaller rectangle to the larger. That would be x to 20 because they correspond. I know they correspond because the larger part, 27, would go with the 36. So x corresponds with 20. And then from here to here, we have 27 corresponds to 36. Now I make it a habit when I solve proportions to first simplify any fraction that I can. So to do that, I'm going to divide numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor of 9. I'm going to draw a little arrow here just to show that that's where my work is going. When I divide numerator and denominator by 9, I get 3 over 4. So that's 3/4. And then the ratio over here on this side remains x over 20. Sweet. Now all I need to do is cross multiply to find the value of x. 20 times 3 is 60. And then 4 times x, that is 4x. What's left is to divide both sides by 4, and when I do that, I'm going to get an answer. And my answer is going to be x equals 15. And so that does make some sense because 15 is a good bit smaller than 27, as 20 was a good bit smaller than 36. It's all about, when you're solving for sides, making sure that your ratios are the same exact comparison, smaller figure to bigger or bigger figure to smaller. And then from there, cross multiplication magic, my people. Go practice finding missing parts of similar figures.